Thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you to those of you who are watching the recording. Welcome. So we will go ahead and get started. And our topic for today is creating rubrics that promote mastery and choice. So welcome to the Summer of Powerful Learning. Thank you for joining us. And today I am excited to be looking at rubrics and how rubrics can help facilitate mastery and help promote student choice and voice in the learning experience. I am Caitlin McLemore. I am an instructor with EdTechTeacher, and we're a partner with the Verizon Digital Promise program and the Summer of Powerful Learning. And so before I was an instructor with EdTechTeacher, I worked as an instructional technology coach or educational technology coach at K through 12 private schools in the Tampa Bay area, where I'm joining you from today, and also in the Nashville area as well. So I worked with students and teachers in all different grade levels and subject areas to integrate technology into the curriculum and really make sure that technology integration is meaningful and purposeful and connected to the teaching and learning experience. And I'm joined today by Rita, who will be my moderator and help manage the chat and share links out. So thank you, Rita. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. My name is Rita Finelli Atkinson, and I'm an Associate Director of Professional Learning Content with the VILS program, and I am so excited that you all could join us. I also have extensive experience in K-12. I used to be a technology coach, and I supported campus and also district pre-K through 12. So I'm really excited about this session because it is going to be awesome. So I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us today. And feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat. I will be, in there with you all.
Thank you. Yes, it's nice to have that support. So as we're going through our session today, there will be opportunities where we ask for participant feedback. So we welcome you to unmute your microphone to speak. You can also use the chat to participate and to share comments, questions, whatever way you feel more comfortable participating. We welcome both all levels of participation, but we do ask that you are present and that you are fully engaged with the content. So we are excited to share some great resources with you today, and we also have some opportunities to facilitate discussion. We want to hear from you, and we have people from all over the place in different contexts today. So it's always great to hear from the educators that are participating in the live session, to hear your real life classroom experiences. And as we're going through this session today, I do encourage you to think about how the information that we're sharing really can connect to you and your unique context. And think about, how do I see myself using this, and how soon can I use this skill or this tool or this resource, and for what purpose? So again, feel free at any point to ask questions, share ideas, thoughts, comments in the chat, and then we'll also have opportunities for live discussion as well. And our objectives for today are to help you all to design a rubric to offer students meaningful opportunities to demonstrate their learning, or at least to begin to understand how students can develop mastery through a variety of learning products assessed with a single rubric. So to start out, I'd like to know, on a scale of 1 to 5 in the chat, can you rate your comfort level with creating rubrics? And if you're looking to increase your comfort level, add a plus sign. And I'm glad to see we've had lots of more people join us today. Great. So we've got 2s, 3s, and 4s, lots of pluses, which makes sense since you're here in a professional learning session on rubrics. Okay. So for those of you that are on the more comfortable side of things, feel free, of course, to share your expertise and your personal examples in the chat as we go along. It's always nice to have some more comfortable users and some participants who have their own experiences to share. And for those of you that are a little less comfortable, hopefully today's session will help you feel more comfortable in utilizing rubrics in your classroom. So what is a rubric? A rubric is a measurement tool that describes the criteria against which a performance, behavior, or product is compared and measured. Rubrics list the criteria established for a particular task and the levels of achievement associated with each criterion. These are often developed in the form of a matrix. So what are the parts of a rubric? That was sort of a narrative description, but essentially a rubric would have a task description, so explaining what the rubric is grading or what the rubric relates to, what is the task or project. And then the characteristics to be rated would be in rows, and the levels of mastery would be in columns. And then there would be a description of each characteristic at each mastery level. And if this still is a bit confusing, we'll look at some visual examples because a rubric is a very visual medium. But before we get into the examples and application and exploration, I do want to speak to the research and thinking about best practices for using and designing rubrics. So within a rubric, it's very important to be careful and deliberate with your language. So you want to try to stay objective with your language, and you want to try to stay positive as well. And then focus on the most important components that you want to provide feedback on. So there may be a lot of things that you're looking for in a project or in creating a rubric, but make sure that those characteristics are really the main things that you're grading, the main things that you want to provide feedback on, that students really need to know or need to demonstrate. And then it's also a good practice to provide rubrics ahead of time so that students can self-evaluate. So it's very clear what your expectations are so that they can self-evaluate and revise before they turn in their final project. And I do also want to point out, we will share these resources later on. If you've registered, you'll get an email with the recording and all of the session information, and all of this research is linked in citations on each of the slides, if you're interested in exploring that further. So the research also, I also wanted to point out the concept of using understanding by design or backward design to begin with the end in mind. So first thinking about what are the desired outcomes, what is it that you want students to learn, and what is it that you want them to demonstrate and then you're thinking about, well, how can they show mastery? So if you want them to demonstrate that they're able to craft a persuasive argument, well, how might they do that? Are they using supporting details? Are they having clear and objective language? You would come up with, that's where you kind of come up with those different characteristics that you're measuring, and then you can design the learning experiences around that piece. So what's the point of using a rubric? Well, it does provide clear communication of expectations. So students see what it is that you're evaluating them on. It also helps you provide more consistent feedback and grading as well, because everyone's being measured by the same rubric. And then it does provide a more student-centered learning experience in that if you're sharing that rubric beforehand, students have the opportunity to self-evaluate. So what is the teacher doing in an experience where in a project or a task that has a rubric? The teacher's clearly communicating the grading policy. So each of these different characteristics that you're measuring, how many points will they be worth? Are there different weighting or scales for each component or characteristic? And really thinking about the mastery of those learning objectives or of those characteristics. And then the teacher's making sure to keep grading consistent and focused feedback on mastery. So helping students to obtain mastery for each of those characteristics within the rubric. And then creating new rubrics or adapting existing ones, adjusting them as needed over time. So one class might struggle with certain concepts over others. So you may want to emphasize or de-emphasize certain areas of the rubric depending on your students' needs. And then it's also helpful to create examples or select student work as models for each characteristic and mastery level. So you can have an exemplar project, you can have a project that shows some areas for improvement, just to give students more ideas of what it is that you're looking for in action. And the student, it's helpful for the student to be able to communicate what is needed to demonstrate mastery. Sometimes students can help determine the desired outcomes and build rubrics with you, depending on kind of what your structure is and what the developmental level of the students are. And then students are creating a product that aligns with the rubric expectations. So I say product in that, with a rubric that's more general and focuses on characteristics and mastery levels, there can be opportunities for student choice. And we'll look at some rubric examples that allow students to submit a wide variety of projects, whether it's a written essay or a video or a poster or tech or non-tech. If you're measuring things like communication and collaboration and presentation and some of those more general characteristics, alignment with content or connecting to interdisciplinary connections, those are things that can come through regardless of the medium. And then the student also self-evaluates before submitting the final assignment, which often results in higher quality work, right? If they look at the rubric and they grade themselves and think, oh, well, I won't get a good grade on this, then they may be more motivated to redo or improve on their work. So how is the technology being used? So the technology can be used to create rubrics and design templates. You can use something that's a simple Google Docs or Microsoft Word template, and we'll look at some of those examples later on. Google Classroom has a built-in rubric template or a rubric creation tool. Many other learning management systems also have that option. If you're creating assignments within your school or district LMS, you might also have options to create rubrics kind of built into those assignments. And then the technology can also be used to demonstrate student understanding. So the products that students are submitting to be graded against that rubric can be things like digital portfolios, either in Google Slides or Microsoft PowerPoint, or doing multimedia presentations. Students can also create products in something like a digital book creator, like Book Creator. They can create movies. They can just have a simple written reflection. There's so many different ways that students can be creative in demonstrating their understanding. So we'll take a moment in the chat, or if you want to get on microphone, and I just would like to hear what tools your students use to demonstrate understanding, or what tools do you use to create rubrics? And if you're brand new, we will share some examples as far as rubric templates later on in the session. So yes, what tools are you using to create rubrics, and what tools are students using to demonstrate or their knowledge and understanding? So Canvas, LMS rubric tool. Google Forms to check for understanding. Google Forms can also be, you could also use that as a self-evaluation tool and complement with a rubric to help students self-evaluate. Spreadsheets are always great for collecting data. Word, LMS, yes. There's so many different tech tools out there, but sometimes the simplest ones are the ones that do the best job. So thinking about those built-in rubric tools, just a simple word processing tool or a spreadsheet tool to create those rubrics. Rubistart and Quick Rubric.
And Caitlin, I know no one has mentioned school or tools that students are using, but I know in the last campus I worked at, we had students using every possible type of tool. They were using a multitude of tools to create videos or presentations or posters or images or, plays, skits, all kinds of different ways to kind of capture their learning in different formats. So it was pretty awesome. And Lori is sharing some as well.
Great. Yes, there's a variety of tech, high tech and low tech tools that students can use to demonstrate understanding, like you said, live skits or videos, to compare the low tech and high tech. It looks like Lori said notebooks, Seesaw, PowerPoint, posters, Tableau. You mentioned, if you think about digital posters, there's infographic creation tools, which, like PictoChart is one, or Canva. There's so many different tools that students can use. So it's really about what students are interested in using, what you are comfortable with them using, what your school and district has access to. But there's a wide variety of ways that students can demonstrate their understanding. And if you use that, if you use the rubric as a way to demonstrate mastery of content and curriculum, then that opens them up to a variety of possibilities. Instead of just saying, I need you to write an essay, saying, I need you to write a persuasive argument. So we'll look at some rubric examples that can kind of contextualize or help you connect these tool ideas with using a rubric. So you can, when you're creating a rubric, you can create when you're using a rubric, you can create your own from scratch, or you can create your own using some of those built-in rubric tools if you have a learning management system that you use, or you can modify an existing template. And then when you use a digital rubric, the nice thing that you can do with feedback is it can be a conversation between students, peers, teachers, etc. So I'm going to demonstrate, and thank you for sharing the resource on this slide. This high impact strategy using Google and self-reported grades. This is a blog post from TCEA, which is a teacher organization, but they've got some information in the beginning, kind of the research behind rubrics, and then they've got some rubric templates. So if you scroll down kind of middle of the blog post, all of these red bullet points are different rubric examples. I like the pizza one, though. I'm not sure which one is the pizza one. I see that, I'm like, ooh. See, that's a great visual example to think about, the different mastery levels as well. So yes, sometimes when you're starting out with using a new strategy, it can be overwhelming to start from scratch. So I always encourage educators to start with an example or a template and then modify. That can be maybe less daunting than just creating from scratch. So let's say we go to the Google Docs 3-level and 4-level rubric template. So it has some guiding questions. Again, what do you want your students to achieve? What qualities define good work? Thinking about those mastery levels. What are evaluation criteria, competency levels, and how do you describe each of those? So if you click on Use Template for any of those templates listed on the website, it will create a private copy of that template within your Google account. So these, I think, are mostly Google templates. So you could, download it as a Word document if you're a Microsoft school, or you could copy it into another word processing program. But if you are using Google, it would make a copy in your Google account, and it's private only to you. And then you can get rid of these guiding questions if you wanted to share this with students. So let's say, and this is my persuasive arguments rubric. I might say communication. I might say supporting details. I might come in and say, creative. And then I might say something like grammar and spelling. Right. And then within each of these cells, what kind of communication exceeds expectations? That might be something like clearly communicates thesis statement. This might be something like includes thesis statement, but needs more detail. All of these are going to be dependent on your content and what it is that you're grading. But the idea is that rather than having to worry about creating a table and formatting it, you're just typing in your content instead of having to build this. So then what you can do with this template is you can make copies and share them with your students. And then we're going to do a live demo here as far as, if Rita, you're willing, as far as doing feedback with your students. So I've got this rubric. I'm sharing it with my student, my example student. I don't know why it didn't share. Oh, it's because I spelled it wrong. There we go. So make sure, let's see. Here's the rubric for today's assignment, right?
So now I have to find it, which I have. Okay, so one way that you guys can use this rubrics, if you share your students, as Caitlin was saying earlier, you want to promote students self-evaluating, because that prompts them to self-reflect on their learning and whether they've actually met the objectives. So hopefully you'll see this. So as a student, and mind you, this is a process that you have to build up to with students, where you show them how to use this tool and how to self-reflect. So when I'm self-evaluating, I might leave a comment and be like, and say something like, I think I met expectations. I'm not really sure I understood how to explain my thesis. And I could leave a comment.
Right. And so then once the student self-evaluates, you as the teacher could come in and see the comment from the student. I think I met expectations. I'm not really sure I understood how to explain my thesis. And then you could reply and say, if you add one more descriptive sentence, you'll meet expectations, right? You can provide feedback, and then that feedback can be a conversation, and it's directly linked to that rubric. So that is a nice thing about that commenting feature, is it has that feedback loop and that thread directly linked within that rubric.
And as we're showing this, so what's really nice about this is that it makes it a conversation, and it's not just a one and done. The goal is that the learning and is focused on mastery. So my product right now might not be perfect, but I'm self-evaluating. My teacher is giving me feedback, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to improve my product and demonstrate that I am meeting those expectations specifically for mastery. And one of the questions that we had in the chat earlier was, how detailed do the descriptions in the rubric need to be, Caitlin? So if you could speak to that.
That's a great question. It's really important to be as clear as possible. So if you are looking for 3 examples or 2 examples or 1 example, list that. Now, some things might be a little bit more subjective in saying like clearly communicates, but if you can, try to provide as much concrete, explicit instructions as possible. Though you saw in this template, it had a 3 criteria and 4 criteria, or 3-point and 4-point example. You don't have to necessarily evaluate a ton of different things. So that's a good segue into the next slide, which has examples of rubrics. So there is here a single point rubric. So this is a single point rubric, I think, using it's just a single column of criteria rather than that whole big table with all of the different rows and columns. So the argument for this is that it's easier to create because you don't have to think about this whole different, well, what does each cell really say? And then you're really focusing in on one aspect of the project. And then students have one thing to target their work on and their efforts on. And then your feedback is focused as well, because you're really honing in on a certain aspect of the project. So there's some additional supplemental blog posts and research related to that. It looks like Rita's sharing these resources as well in the chat. But this idea of a single point rubric, there's one below, but here's breakfast in bed. So breakfast in bed, what is the food like? What is the presentation like? What is the comfort level like? And so then it shows evidence of exceeding standards and areas for improvement. So rather than saying you have a 5 in this criteria, or you have a 4, it's giving you one thing that you're focusing on, breakfast in bed, and then those 3 criteria, and how did you meet it and what can you improve? So it's just a different way of looking at that rubric and thinking about it's simple, but it's still very clear. So correct temperature, clean tray, woken gently. So some of these are a little bit more subjective. Woken gently might be subjective depending on who you're asking, but it's trying to be as clear as possible and just focusing on this one experience or this one target. Some other examples here. So there is also an option for students to do peer evaluation, particularly if you're thinking about that concept of mastery and you're having students go through several iterations and working toward that mastery. Maybe you have one grading cycle or one evaluation cycle where students are evaluating each other. So maybe they're doing a self-evaluation, then they're doing a peer evaluation, and then they're doing a teacher evaluation. So here's a Google form example where students are actually evaluating their peers on presentations. So that's another option. You might be evaluating students on their content, and then peers might be evaluating them on their presentation. So they're creating some sort of product, then they're doing some sort of presentation, and then there's different elements that are being focused on by peers versus teachers. Then we also have an example of a reading fluency rubric here as well. And this is a PDF, but you could very easily create this in Google or Microsoft or whatever rubric creation opportunity or rubric creation tool that you want to use. And if we're thinking about fluency, it has reads word by word or reads with good phrasing. It has frequently hesitates, reads smoothly. You could use this for a live reading fluency check. You could have students self-evaluate when they're reading at home. You could have students do peer evaluation. You could even have students do a screencast or do a video conference where they're recording themselves reading, and then you're using this rubric to evaluate and to provide feedback. And then I also wanted to highlight this. This is a project from a 6th grade English class where all students read the same novel and then had a variety of choices as far as demonstrating their understanding of the novel. So students had a menu of options of different projects. So create a digital or hand-created movie poster, pick a scene from the book and write a script for it, create your own podcast or talk show, create a graphic novel, write the first chapter of a sequel, create a diorama, create a Jeopardy game, create a board game, and they could even propose their own ideas. So there's a lot of different choices here. So how do you evaluate, or how do you grade or provide feedback or see that students have demonstrated mastery with this many projects? Their students started out with an action plan and really thinking about their follow through of their project. And then I'll click ahead to a checklist. So students use a checklist as a precursor to the rubric where they were given an actual grade. But then the project rubric included 4 different levels of mastery. So below, approaching, meets, and above standards. And then the things that they were evaluated on were understanding of text, deeper connections, planning, creativity, quality of work, teamwork, and contribution. So those are things that are evident regardless of what they're doing, whether it's a diorama or a script or a live performance or a movie trailer. You know, the understanding of the text comes through in all of those different types of projects. And then you can see with this particular rubric, it does show the number of points. So the understanding of text and the deeper connections weighed more than maybe teamwork or quality of work. And then there was also a presentation rubric associated with that. So that's an example of a rubric kind of contextualized within a project-based learning experience. So we have some time to explore resources, and we are going to first take about 8 minutes for you all to individually explore these rubrics, and then we'll have an opportunity to discuss and reflect. So Rita just shared in the chat a variety of rubric resources, but I'll set an 8-minute timer. And the goal during this time is for you all to individually explore, look for rubrics that are maybe most relevant to your classroom. You might go back to the templates that we demonstrated as well. Are there any questions before I set that timer going? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick repeat back, Caitlin. So for this individual exploration time, everyone is exploring rubrics that they want, and they can explore these rubrics. And then I had a clarifying question that was sent to me privately. Do they just need to explore these rubrics, or can they explore any of the resources that we have shared with them?
Any of the resources that we've shared, yes.
Okay, awesome.
I don't know if you can hear the music, but no. Oh. Chat parts. Thank you. Yes, it looks like we have a resource that was shared in the chat about the parts of a value rubric. So if you want to explore that, Roberto shared that, which is a really interesting way to sort of visualize a rubric. And then it looks like there's lots of supplemental resources as well. So thank you for sharing that. But now what we're going to do is have an opportunity to discuss with each other in sort of a smaller group. So we are going to spend some time in breakout rooms. If you can share either on mic or chat, don't feel like you have to all get on video for this, but at least I encourage you all to participate and share what rubrics you explored with your small group and how you might implement those rubrics in your classroom, and then we'll have an opportunity to come back together to discuss. I see a hand raised. Yes.
Hi, yeah, could you please save the chat for me? I'm just getting home. I'm not at my computer yet. And the chat disappears if you go to a breakout room.
Oh, sure. Yes, we can save the chat and share that out.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we're ready. So I'm going to open the rooms.
And we'll do about 5 minutes to discuss. Do you have another question, Suzanne?
I think she just left it up.
It looked like it had gone away for a minute, so I wasn't sure. We can.
Okay, closing the rooms.
All right, welcome back, everyone. As they return. Maybe everyone's deep in discussion.
I mean, this is a really great topic. 38 seconds.
Good thing to think about as school gets started. I know lots of schools are returning this week, and next few weeks we'll have even more.
I know.
But there's some schools that don't start even until September. So I guess it depends on your district, where you are in the world.
Okay, we got 3 seconds.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other a little bit better. But if you feel like sharing on your video, or if you want to share in just with your microphone or chat, I want to hear what you all found during your exploration, what you discussed, maybe what you're thinking about as far as your plans for using rubrics over the next school year. Any brave folks who want to start?
I could share.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Lori, our group was talking a lot about how rubrics can be pretty confusing, I think, both for teacher and student. And so just, I know I personally want to try to simplify them, and I've tried to do that over time, but I like the single point rubric. I might try to use that as a guide.
Great. So talking about simplification. Yes, some rubrics can get really complex, and then it's kind of like students and teachers get lost in that rubric. Anyone else?
I think that's a really great point, Lori. I know when I use rubrics in the classroom, especially when I first started using them, I would say it took me maybe like an entire school year to really refine it to where it was something that was great. So give yourself that grace that especially if you're trying a rubric or a new rubric even, that is more mastery focused, that it is an iterative process. And I think that's one of the reasons why inviting students to be a participant in that feedback process is really important, because that's where you learn where the misconceptions and the lack of clarity is. And then you start realizing, is this rubric really assessing what I wanted to assess? And honestly, I'll be vulnerable and say that when I first started using rubrics, my rubrics were assessing the wrong thing. And that was part of the iterative process of refining it to where it really was assessing the learning authentically. So give yourself that grace that it is a process that you'll be refining over time.
I kind of have a question, and I'm just curious. When the rubrics are set up, and I know we use, well, part of our system uses standard-based grading, and some of it uses numerical scoring. So how does the rubric fit in with the SVG and then also to the numerical scoring?
With that table, you can always assign points to each of the things that you're measuring in a rubric. So if you're measuring, connection to content, exceeds expectation could be 10 points. And then if it meets expectations, could be 8, 4. So you can assign a number to any of those cells. So then, if you imagine a student exceeds expectations in 1, that's 10, and then maybe they get or 8, or a letter grade, right? So each row they would get a grade for, which would combine for a total grade for that project. And then if you're assessing standards, you could have the standards be criteria, or think of what criteria might demonstrate mastery of a particular standard.
And then to add to that a little bit, Carmen, I think the main difference between traditional grades and standards-based grading is that in traditional grades, I would say typically you assess once, and whatever grade that student gets on that product, that's what it is. In standards-based grading, it's more towards mastery. So students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency in a specific skill or standard. So with rubrics, whichever way you're using them, you can continually update that grade if the student is showing that they're reaching mastery. So even if in September they were not meeting standard, if in November they're approaching standard, you can adjust that standard base grading to approaching standard. If in January they're proficient, you can adjust it to that. And then, if in February they're exceeding expectations, you can adjust it to that. And you would have your rubric data to show that they've been making that progress over the year. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes it a bit clearer. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. We have a couple minutes left in our session, so I do want to encourage you all to please fill out the session survey to provide feedback on today's session, and also to log your attendance. If you requested when you registered for this session, you will receive a certificate of completion via email, and you'll also receive a link to the recording, though that will also be posted on the Summer of Powerful Learning website. So we have all of our past sessions and recordings. It takes a little bit of time to process, but once it's processed and ready to go, it will be posted and shared here. You can see past ones say watch now, and that'll just bring you to a YouTube link to watch the recording. And we have a couple sessions coming up. We're nearing the end of the summer. But next week, same time, we'll be looking at evaluating tech tools for student-centered use. And then there will be a session the following week at 4 p.m. Eastern on how to use the New York Times The Learning Network activities. So if you want information about those or about our past sessions, please visit the Verizon Digital Promise Summer of Powerful Learning website. And Rita also shared a link to the presentation if you want all of the resources that we linked in there. I know there was a lot of things shared out today. So I do want to end just by saying thank you for attending and for participating, and best of luck in this new school year, and best of luck in your rubrics experience.